everyone, welcome back and welcome to my kitchen. Today I wanted to do a little bit of a different type of video. So in celebration of Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, we are going to be making dumplings, and I thought it'd be fun if while we wrap some dumplings together, we could have some nice and wholesome chats about what it's like to grow up Asian American. I think the Asian American tag was started here on YouTube a few years ago by Amy Lee, and I remember watching some of my other favorite YouTubers like Jen Im, Sophia, Whaley do this tag, and I absolutely loved their videos. They made me feel so seen, and I thought it'd be fun if I could do the tag myself and wrap some dumplings with you guys at the same time. So today we are making some veggie dumplings. This is actually my first time making this recipe, so hopefully it turns out okay. I can leave a link to the recipe that I'm using in the description, but basically what is in here is some snow pea shoots. If you're Asian, you know how bougie snow pea shoots are. So I basically cooked those down, squeezed the water out of them, and chopped them up really finely. We've also got a block of extra firm tofu in here that I drained and crumbled up. We've got some Chinese chives and oyster mushrooms that I chopped up really finely and sauteed. Some sesame oil, soy sauce, white pepper. I think that's it. And I also did wrap a few already off camera just to, warm up my wrapping skill before we turn the camera on. But if you are interested, here is a little tutorial on how to wrap a dumpling. My mom taught me this technique, so I am absolutely not a professional at all, so take from this what you will. But basically what you do is you grab a spoonful of, or a chopstick full of your dumpling filling, you place it in the middle of your dumpling, and you always want to have a little bowl of water with you. We're going to use that to help us seal the edges of the dumpling. So you want to wet the top half of the dumpling wrapper, and then you want to pinch it in the middle, and then on the outside you want to wet one half of the wrapper, and then you want to fold it by pinching in one of the edges while keeping the other one still smooth, and that's how we're gonna get that like crescent moon shape. So pinch it about 3 to 4 times on each side, and then we want to repeat that on the other side. So wet the outside edge and then pinch, pinch, pinch. And then you just want to press all of the outsides to seal it. And there you go, you have a little dumpling, yay! So I'm gonna keep wrapping these, and while we do that, let's answer the tag questions. I am Chinese Canadian, and I consider myself to be first generation. So my parents immigrated from China to Canada in their mid-20s, and I was the first generation to be born here and to grow up here. This is a really interesting question, and it really got me reflecting, trying to remember like a single incident that taught me that I'm a minority, and it made me realize that I honestly can't think of a time in my life where I didn't feel like a minority. I've just always felt like my Asianness was so apparent and separated me from other people. I mean, it definitely doesn't help that I grew up in like a very white, very small, conservative small town, and my school was like 99.5% white people. I honestly don't remember too much of elementary school, but I remember a general feeling I had of just being different, and that difference was that I was Chinese, and that this difference was a bad thing. I was very aware that I had different features than everyone else, and somehow I picked up along the way that those differences made me less attractive. Like, I remember this one day on the bus home, this is probably in like grade 1 or 2 or something, this one kid he was just going on and on about how flat my face was, and he was even like imitating, like squishing his face to imitate how flat my face was, and I remember just sitting there like, I remember being very aware of the fact that I had a different name than everyone else. So my first name is actually my Chinese name, which is Yuanqing, and Audrey is my middle name, and I go by Audrey because it's easier for everyone else to say here, but I was very aware that I had two different names for my two different identities, and that made me different. I was aware that I knew how to speak Chinese and no one else at school knew how to speak Chinese, and that made me different. I was aware that the foods I ate were different from everyone else, that my parents listened to different music than my friends' parents, and yeah, I was just really aware of all of these little things that made me different. I don't have a distinct memory of me discovering that I was a minority, but it was more of a case of me putting together all of these little puzzle pieces over time to piece together the understanding that yes, I am a minority and that this is a bad thing. Or at least, so I thought back then it was a bad thing. Oof, these questions are really coming for me. I am very sad to say that I strongly rejected my culture up until probably the end of high school. When you're a kid, being different is like the worst thing that you can be because your differences give other kids a reason to pick on you. And kids can be really mean, and I quickly learned that my Asianness gave other kids a reason to pick on me. I think the thing I got picked on the most at school was for the lunches that I brought to school. Lunchtime was always such an ordeal. I was always so afraid of what the other kids would think of my lunch and that they would think it was weird or gross. And this all started in grade 1 or 2. I remember bringing those like dried seaweed snacks to school and everyone freaked out. They were like, "Oh my God, why are you eating seaweed? That is so gross." And after that, all I wanted to bring to school were like fruit gushers and Dunkaroos. And of course my mom didn't let me have any of that stuff. And I mean, now I'm happy that she didn't feed me that garbage as a kid, but like, I wasn't happy about it back then. I remember one day I brought dumplings to school, which were and still are one of my favorite foods. And I remember the kids were like, "Oh my God, that looks so weird. What is that? Oh, it smells like someone farted." And I remember just being so confused because this is very normal to me. Like, this is not weird at all. I think it smells really good. And I mean, this is my lunch and I'm hungry, but I'm too embarrassed to eat this now. And I remember just being in this like conflict of whether or not to eat my lunch because I was so afraid of what the other kids would think of me. And that makes me so sad to think now, like no kid should ever have to feel that way. It is so sad to me now that there was actually a time where I would rather bring bologna sandwiches and Lunchables to school instead of dumplings. Like I would rather eat processed, like probably plastic meat and cheese over delicious hand-wrapped dumplings. Like the things I would do for white acceptance. Asian food is honestly one of my favorite things about being alive, and I don't know how I could live without dumplings. And it makes me so sad to think that there was a time where I rejected my culture's food. Like, your culture's food should be something to be celebrated and appreciated. The rejection of my culture went a lot deeper than food, and this is gonna get really personal, but I just rejected and hated the fact that I was Asian in general, and that led to a lot of self-hate, honestly. I remember once at recess, this was probably in like grade 5 or something, and we were playing some like physical game. It was maybe like Foursquare or something. And I remember this kid that I was playing with, this 10-year-old kid, said to me, "Fuck off, you Chinese kid." And I ran straight to the bathroom and cried my eyes out. I remember being so sad because I thought that no one liked me, and the reason they didn't like me was because I was Chinese. And I mean, that's not something that I can change about myself. Like, it's not like I could just will myself to be white as much as I wish that I could. You know, as a kid, you care so much about what other people think of you, and all you want is to fit in with your peers. And I thought that that was impossible for me because I wasn't white, and I thought that I was just going to be an outsider forever. But as you get older, I think a byproduct of that is just you start caring less and less about what other people think of you. And a big part of that is definitely that you start accepting more and more of yourself. And I think something that really helped me to start accepting myself was in high school when there were finally other Asian girls in my class. And of course we became friends because we bonded over being ethnic minorities in a very white school. But I remember just being so in awe of how I could relate to these girls on such a deep level that I couldn't with my white friends. And that really helped me to get over this feeling of just like being an alien. And that feeling when you realize that you're not alone is one of the biggest sighs of relief ever. And it can really start to help you to start accepting yourself. And as of today, I'm in a place where I fully accept and embrace my Chinese culture. It took a minute to get here, but I would say it was a very worthwhile journey because it taught me so much about self-acceptance, and now I think I appreciate my culture even more because of it. All right, class, welcome to Wokeology 101. In today's lecture, we are going to be talking about the model minority myth. The model minority myth basically assumes that Asians as a whole are successful, well-educated, have high-paying jobs, and are financially well off. And the way that they got there was through hard work and strong family values and a strong emphasis on education. This assumption is a complete generalization and is incredibly harmful for a number of reasons. First of all, it creates a wedge between Asians and other people of color, and this myth was actually specifically designed to deny that racism against Black people exists because, well, I mean, Asians have made it in this world by being good, hardworking citizens. Why can't Black folks do it too? This idea, not only does it create this false belief that racism and discrimination can just be overcome by working hard, it's also completely illogical. Like, you can't compare the racism experienced by Asians to the racism experienced by Black people. Like, they're just completely different experiences. This idea has been used to justify racism against Black people and Asian people, and it's basically an excuse for white America and white Canada to avoid responsibility for addressing racism. Also, there's this underlying assumption behind the model minority myth that Asians are just a monolith. This myth was very much created with East Asians in mind and didn't really consider the experience of South Asians, Central Asians, Southeast Asians. Asia is an incredibly diverse continent with over 50 countries, and it expands way more than just Japan, Korea, and China. And when we view the entire Asian community as this monolith that's represented by a successful East Asian, we are completely erasing the unique struggles faced by Asians from other Asian communities. Asians actually face the largest socioeconomic gap compared to other ethnic groups, and Asians aren't all out here living like crazy rich Asians. So because there's this false belief that Asians are generally successful, they're kind of seen as having this like white privilege. But when we see Asians in this way as basically white, we are invalidating their experience as a ethnic minority and all the painful experiences of racism that comes with that. And because Asians are sometimes seen as basically white, that's why racism against Asians is largely downplayed and normalized. Racism against Asians has existed for centuries. It didn't just start with the rise in anti-Asian attacks during COVID. If anything, I hope at the very least that the tragedies that the Asian community has faced over the past 15 months is a wake-up call that, like, hey, we are suffering. We are still not treated as equal citizens as much as you think that we're basically white. The truth is, Asians can never be white. Did I lie? All right, thank you for attending this lecture of Wokeology 101. This is definitely a stereotype I've been struggling with a lot over the past year with the rise in anti-Asian attacks, and I thought I could take this opportunity to spread some awareness, and it'd be really cool if you could be allies with us. I did make a video going into more detail about how you can become an ally, and I'll leave that video in the cards right now. But let's finish with our dumplings first, and now we can continue to be woke. Okay. Can I speak my language? This is a sore spot for me. I can barely speak Mandarin. Mandarin was actually the first language I learned before I learned English as a kid, but I actually remember having a distinct memory of being like a 3-year-old and starting preschool and starting to learn English in school, and the Chinese side of my brain just like atrophying. Like I remember it just being progressively more and more of a struggle to speak in Chinese. Growing up, my parents mostly spoke English with me at home, and now I'm at a point where I can barely speak Chinese. I can understand it a little bit, but for me to reply in Chinese it's a struggle for me. So my mom and I sometimes will call my grandpa, who lives in China, and he only speaks Chinese. And I feel so bad because every time we call, I only have like 2 lines, and it's always the same. It's like, "Hi grandpa, how are you? How's your health? I miss you. Okay, bye." Okay, time to get a new plate. So yes, I would very much love to improve my Mandarin. I do admit it has fallen into that category of things that are important but not urgent, so they end up just getting put off. I'm not proud of that, and I do want to get on it. If you have any recommendations for resources for learning Mandarin, especially as an American or Canadian-born Chinese, please leave them in the comments. I would absolutely love if you guys could help me out with this one. I know some of my Asian American friends struggle with a language barrier between them and their parents. I feel very fortunate that my parents do speak fluent English and that we don't experience that. My parents do have a little bit of an accent, but honestly didn't even know that my parents had an accent until high school. So my dad was a teacher at my high school, and I remember kids coming up to me and being like, "Oh my God, Audrey, I love your dad's accent." And I would just hear like, "What accent?" I remember some kids even making fun of my dad's accent, which is so messed up and racist now that I think about it. But anyways, yeah, that is how I learned that my dad has an accent. Back to my relationship with my parents. So even though we didn't have a language barrier, there was definitely a cultural difference between my parents and I. I would say my parents are quite traditionally Chinese, and as a kid, they did put a lot of pressure on me to get good grades so that I could get into a good school and get a good degree so that I could get a good job, that kind of thing. And I remember that did put quite a wedge in our relationship back then because, all I wanted to do was make my parents proud and live up to their expectations of me. But I felt like I was never good enough for them. But I would say now that's not really an issue. Of course, I still want my parents to be proud of me, but I think back then it was more conditional in that I will only be proud of you once you achieve this. And now I'm pretty confident in the fact that my parents are proud of me no matter what. And that's pretty emotional for me to say, not gonna lie. And now that I'm older and have, a better understanding of how the world works, I do understand where their worldview comes from and where this cultural difference comes from. We grew up on completely different sides of the world in very different cultures that value very different things. And my parents very much value education and having a prestigious career because that's what they learned you needed to do to make it in this world. And of course they wanted that for me too. And while I do value a traditional education and career to an extent, my privileged ass is over here like, but I want to explore my passions. My parents are immigrants, and when you're a new immigrant and the thing that's on top of your mind all the time is survival, like literal putting food on the table and a roof over your head kind of survival, there's no room in your brain to explore your passions and your purpose. And I completely recognize that this is a very privileged way of thinking, and I am so incredibly grateful that my parents support me in my passions and whatever I choose to pursue. Today, I proudly identify as Chinese Canadian, and it took a minute to get here, but I wouldn't want to have any other identity, and that is a really big deal for me to say given how much I struggled with my identity in the past. Being a Canadian-born person with Chinese immigrant parents puts you in such an interesting and unique social location, and it teaches you to see the world in a certain way because you're positioned between two cultures. So I think it helps you to be more open-minded and empathetic to other people's experiences. I love that I got to grow up in two different cultures and I have two homes. Like, Ontario is definitely home for me, but when I visit my family in Shanghai, I feel right at home there too. My favorite thing about my Asian American heritage. Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is food. Chinese food is really the ultimate comfort food for me, and I have such a deep appreciation for the history and effort that Chinese people put into their food. Like, this is truly a labor of love. And I didn't even make my dumpling wrappers by scratch, and I was still like sweating making this filling. But also, one of my favorite things about being Asian American is meeting other Asian Americans. I feel like we can just relate to each other and understand each other on such a deep level. Like, we just get each other and it's like instant chemistry. One of my favorite things ever is talking to other Asian Americans about being Asian American, or even just casually bringing up little things about being Asian American in conversation. Like, I feel like we're just able to have a lot more nuanced conversations and laugh about things and memes that other people wouldn't be able to fully understand. Also, shout out to my parents who flew across the ocean, started a brand new life here in Canada from scratch. Like, that takes a whole nother level of resilience, and I am so incredibly proud that that's our story. Yeah, there are so many things I love about being Asian American. It is such a rich and colorful way of existing in this world, and I wouldn't want to change it for the world. Alright, so those are all the questions for the Growing Up Asian American tag. I still have some filling and wraps left, but honestly I'm pretty hungry now, so let's go ahead and boil these babies. Okay, here we go. I'm scared. Okay. Okay. Literally I'm doing this one at a time because I'm too afraid of splashing the boiling water. Then you want to stir them really gently so that they don't stick, but also so that you don't break the skin. And then we'll just let that sit for another 5-ish minutes. All right, I think we are done here. Let's take these out. Sadly, I don't have one of those slotted spoons, but this will do. All right, so let's give one a try. Oh my god! Wow! Damn. I think my mom will be proud. I'm gonna go ahead and eat all of these now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for listening to my story of growing up Asian American. I would love for you to share your stories of what it was like growing up for you. No matter what your ethnic or cultural background is, there is so much value in other people's stories, and I would absolutely love to learn from yours. As always, I hope you're staying healthy and staying safe, and I will see you next time. Bye.